Hello and welcome everyone to our end of the year WFO webinar. My name is Ilya Kranaukov and I'm a Senior Development Manager at WFO. Today's webinar is on 2022 reflections on offshore wind. And it's my great pleasure to welcome our two excellent speakers for today. We have Richard Sandford, the Vice President Offshore Wind UK, and we have Christian Schrimpf, the Senior Vice President RWE. And before we jump into the presentation, let me tell you a couple of words about our organization, WFO. Our organization was founded in 2018, and we're a nonprofit entity focused on offshore wind energy only. We promote offshore wind energy worldwide, and our members represent the complete offshore wind value chain. We have international offices in Hamburg, Tokyo, Taipei, and New York. And in terms of our activities, it's very straightforward as we focus on three things. We advise various stakeholders on offshore wind around the world. We inform about offshore wind via a number of media channels, and we connect the global offshore wind community by organizing events such as this one. And here you can see our members. We're very happy to have over 100 global members at the moment, and we're delighted to have companies from all segments of our value chain from North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. And if somehow you're still not a member of WFO, it's a great time of joining us. Please feel free to contact me or our Managing Director, Gunnar Herzig, and ask any questions you might have. And also a couple of words about the structure for this webinar, which is the same and very simple. During the first half of this webinar, two of our presenters give their thoughts about offshore wind developments and whatever happened in the last year or so. And then during the second half, we have a Q&A session. And during that time, you feel free to ask a question. For that one, on the right-hand side, there's a chat function, and you can just insert your question, and I will read it after during the Q&A session. So without any further ado, I'm giving the floor to Richard. And Richard, the floor is yours.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Hopefully you can see the screen. Technology is working, I trust.
Yes, all good.
Excellent, that's great. Well, a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. So thank you, WFO, for inviting me to speak to you today. So as you've heard, I'm Richard Sandford. I head up BP's offshore wind business here in the UK, and I'm also honoured to be the chairman of the WFO board, which is a great privilege. Now, I'm actually very new to BP. I only joined the company in July of this year. I have a background in power generation and spent the last 15 years in various leadership roles in offshore wind, and all of those with RWE. So it's great to be sort of sharing the virtual platform with Christian from RWE as well. Anyway, I've been asked to share with you today a little bit about what I'm up to here at BP. So it is a reflection on last year, because I joined BP last year, to share what we're up to. So yeah, I joined BP just 5 months ago. Prior to that, as I said, I was with RWE, and I've been with them for 35 years. Now, I'm sure everybody knows and have heard of BP, and I think, as these statistics you can see on the screen here suggest, a real super major. But what's really cool about BP, and to be honest, why I joined BP, is that we're on a journey. They're a super major that's on an incredible transformation journey. So at BP, we're reimagining energy. So really transforming from an international oil company into an integrated energy company, which is really exciting. So we have a target that we set ourselves to become net zero by 2050 or sooner. We're working hard to reduce the emissions from our operations, and particularly our emissions from our oil and gas operations. And since 2019, we've already reduced those emissions by about 30%. And we're certainly well on track to meet or exceed our own AIM-1 emission interim target, which is really good. And part of this strategy is also to start reducing the production, so our global production from our oil and gas activities by 40% by 2030. But what really excites me is the other side of the equation. So while we're reducing production, we're cleaning up production, we're cleaning up what we're doing, we have huge plans in place to grow our renewable generation business. In fact, by 2030, our ambition is to have delivered 50 gigawatts of renewable energy. And I guess connected to this, we have a whole load of other plans. We're going to be massively expanding our electric vehicle charging networks right across the globe. And hydrogen is going to play a key role in our strategy. So producing lots of clean, green hydrogen, which, look, pulling all that together really does make us a truly integrated company. So let's have a look at offshore wind. So offshore wind is going to play a key part in BP's transition, and we're well on with that journey. So it was only in 2020, the turn of the decade, that BP entered the offshore wind business. We entered one of the world's fastest growing markets in the US, and then only last year we entered one of the world's largest markets, the UK. So that means in just 2 years, we've gone from a pipeline of 0 to an expected generation capacity of more than 10 gigawatts, again, working with our partners and the shares in the projects. And as you can see from this map, although it's early days in our journey, we've got some really cool joint ventures. So we partner with EnBW in the UK, we've partnered with Equinor in the US, Statkraft Anaka in Norway, and Marubeni in Japan, to name a few. So let's just take a slightly closer look at the projects here in the UK that I'm responsible for. So we've got 2 Round 4 projects in the Irish Sea, Mona and Morgan, and then on the east coast of the UK, our ScotWind project, Morven. So in total, that's nearly 6 gigawatts, which is going to play a really key role in the UK's target of decarbonisation and the target of having 50 gigawatts of operational offshore wind by 2030. And again, we're really proud to have a project in Scotland, which again will contribute to Scotland's target, which is currently 11 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. So those projects alone are going to produce enough clean, green, secure, affordable power for over 6 million UK homes. And if there's one thing that I've really learned as I've been developing offshore wind over the last sort of decade and a half, and that's the work that we do, it's really important to bring communities and societies with you on the journey. I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted, but we all know that offshore wind offers huge potentials, but it offers massive local benefits as well. But you really have to put the effort in to make sure that those benefits are realised in the communities that we work in. And I've been really impressed since being at BP and with our joint venture team, with our Morven project, as an example in Scotland, the extra effort that they're making to really create additional value and long-term sustainable value in Scotland particularly. So although this project is still in its relatively early stage of its life cycle, we've made huge investments already in Scottish ports, in commitments to green hydrogen, to education, to skills, to innovation initiatives, funds and centres, all in Scotland. And we've got some great plans to go even further. So these include things like shipbuilding, a global centre of excellence for our operations, our global operations business, loads more EV charging, loads more green hydrogen, and loads more community funds and benefits. And I think that's just a great example when you put the effort in of the benefits that you can see in the local communities that we all work in, which I really like. And it's not just the local communities. You know, we talk about the various different challenges that we face in offshore wind, but skills and resources are a key challenge. So we can all see this huge growth in offshore wind, and we're seeing this huge growth globally. Many countries are setting some really challenging and quite aspirational targets for offshore wind. And I guess as an industry, we should be really proud of this, because we've developed a technology that really does address today's energy needs: clean, affordable, and secure generation. But we do face challenges. We know there are challenges around the availability of grid, around supply chain, but also, and quite importantly, around the skilled resources that we need to deliver offshore wind. So when it comes to resources, I know we're all doing our bit, and particularly again at BP, we are training and developing more and more people to create a skilled, diverse workforce. So investing in our people of today, our people of tomorrow, is absolutely critical. Inspiring people at school, it starts at school in education. Inspiring and supporting initiatives in schools, colleges, universities, investing in training and reskilling people. Again, something, you know, we're investing quite a lot of time and effort and money in. So people from other industries such as the armed forces, or in our case particularly the oil and gas industry, and reskilling them with the skills and experiences that they need to be able to work in and have successful careers in offshore wind. And to be honest, it's organisations like WFO that really help us as an industry flourish in these sorts of things right across the world. And I guess that takes me on to reflect on WFO as well. So as chairman of WFO, and I was a founding board member alongside David Tim, who we're going to hear from later, and Martin Skiba, I wanted to share with you a few reflections on WFO's journey as well. So under Gunnar Herzig's leadership as managing director, I think WFO have really gone from strength to strength. And I thank all of our members for your support in growing the business. And on the screen there, you can see some of the statistics, which are really quite impressive. Seeing how the membership's grown from just 10 members in 2019 to well over 100 members today, so a tenfold increase. Last year, we had 30 new members alone, which is really impressive. The team published 7 offshore wind reports, organised 25 events. So events like this, webinars, workshops, special events, advisory activities in all sorts of new up and coming countries. And also the creation of new subcommittees. So again, the Offshore Wind Cable and Floating Substructure Committee and the Hydrogen Working Committee. Yeah, some great forums for people to really get engaged and really help take these technologies forward. So it's a truly impressive start. We've now got a larger board as we're growing our membership, and certainly a whole load of enthusiasm to help the industry along with their journey. So again, I thank you all for, as we heard earlier, for being members, and if you're not members, to really reach out to the team and consider membership. So that's a sort of a brief fly through what I'm up to now. with BP and WFO. I think as an industry, we've got a really, really exciting future ahead of us. And yeah, I look forward to working with the whole offshore wind community to realise this ambition. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker for today, Christian Schrimpf. Christian, over to you.
Perfect. Thanks a lot again. Ilya, thanks for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to speak at the WFO and to sit here with an esteemed and old colleague like Richard Sandford. Very happy to see you, Richard. My name is Christian Schrimpf. I head up the offshore wind development business in continental Europe for RWE. And I've been actually part of this industry for the last 13 years, first in a few roles within E.ON Renewables, and then for the last couple of years within RWE Renewables. So I can truly say that that I'm a long-standing member of this industry, and renewables energy is what drives me every day. I would like to talk to you today about a few trends and challenges that we are seeing and that we will be seeing in this industry. 22 was a year of big shifts and changes in the overall environment, and we can also observe 5 global events that have been and will be shaping our industry going forward. All of them obviously somehow interrelated to each other. Firstly, we are seeing an increase in global conflicts, the obvious ones being the Russian war on Ukraine and the Taiwan crisis. As a result of that, we are seeing increasing commodity prices and inflation. We are further seeing governments consequently and significantly raising the renewable targets. In that context, also we've been seeing a major milestone in the US, which was the Inflation Reduction Act. And last but not least, maybe one of our biggest challenges, we are seeing a global supply chain that is under immense pressure. Moving forward, there are 3 trends that we are observing and that will drive our industry in the next few years to come. Firstly, there is a massively accelerated growth that is mainly driven by the ever-increased political aspirations and goals that have been put forward, and we'll come to that in a second. Secondly, we can see an increasing market complexity, and thirdly, a severe scarcity in resources. Let me spend a minute on the first aspect that I've been mentioning, the accelerated growth. As we can see on the left graph, there has been quite a remarkable increase in the announced goals just within 1 year, right? So if you look at the light blue bars, those are the announced targets of a few selected European countries from 2021, so just a year ago. And then you can see the blue bars with the newly announced targets from this year. And you will notice that there is an increase of roughly 50 gigawatts just in Europe only in terms of targets, all within 1 year. Consequently, we can see a global build out of roughly 140 plus 140 gigawatts until 2030, which is just mind-blowing sometimes, I think. All this comes in the environment of rising market complexity, as I mentioned before. Rising market complexity because there's a few new parameters that we are observing in many markets and in many upcoming auctions. First of all, there's an increasing relevance for qualitative criteria. We've seen a prime example just now in Hollandse Kust West as the first purely qualitative auction in Europe. We can also observe an ever-increasing focus on local content requirements, just as well as a growing importance of sustainability, and last not least, system integration and offtake challenges that are all being reflected in latest and upcoming auction tenders. On top, we can observe the massive challenge of an increasing scarcity of resources. Our supply chain is struggling, and we are all faced with a workforce that is likely not going to be sufficient in order to fuel our growth. So these are basically, in my view, the key challenges that we will need to overcome if we want to make the change happen, if we want to comply with the increased targets and ambitions that I've been talking about just a few minutes ago. We will need to do something for the supply chain. We will need to increase the local turbine production capacities, the port infrastructure. Obviously, also the grid infrastructure is lagging behind and needs sufficient improvements. And then, as also Richard mentioned in his presentation, we need to attract skilled professionals. We need to attract the right workforce that we're currently not seeing yet. We're not there yet. Last not least, global supply lead times need to sufficiently decrease in order to fuel the growth that we've been seeing. Overall, I can see RWE well positioned in the current environment, especially if I look at some of the most recent successes that we've been seeing. Just a few weeks ago, the Hollandse Kust West tender award, which is addressing a lot of the topics that I've just been talking about, which is first of a kind and will probably be a blueprint for many other qualitative auctions to follow. Then earlier the year, we've seen a win in New York Bight, and then a few other great successes from last year, Thor in Germany and the UK round 4. This is giving RWE a nice position as the number 2 global offshore player. However, if we want to maintain this position, if this industry wants to continue thriving and reaching the goals that I've been showing, we need to be creative. We need to change a lot of things, and we mustn't be complacent. Thanks a lot. And back to you, Ilya.
So we have quite some time for the discussion, and I hope it's going to be an interesting one. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat function on your right-hand side, and I'll read these questions to the audience. So it would be, I think, great to start with your personal experiences in offshore wind. And my first question would be, Richard and Christian, could you please share your experiences on how you get into offshore wind? You just mentioned both that you have like 35 and 13 years of experiences. So were you thinking about this already in kindergarten, or maybe somewhere along the way, or it just happened accidentally? So maybe you can just share your personal experiences how you get and how do you like it in general. So yeah, that would be great. Maybe we'll start with Richard first and then Christian.
Yeah, thank you. What a great question. So I got into offshore wind 15 years ago, thereabouts. And I guess at that stage, the industry was fairly immature. So I was quite lucky to be able to come in without any offshore wind experience, because very, very few people had any experience. Where of course today we're always looking for people with experience. So I had an advantage coming in there. And I took the role as project director of RWE's Gwynter Moor project, which was 750 megawatts at the time. Of course, I had experience of leadership, of project management, of power systems and so on, but not specifically offshore wind. So I had a lot of learning to do there. Took that project through consent, through FID, and then I took a role on the leadership team of we've had various different names over the years, but the RWE and then became Energy leadership team. So I guess that's how I got into it. So I'd moved from I was actually at an oil-fired power plant, coal-fired plant, gas plants before that. So it was really spotting an opportunity and going for it, and really just giving it everything to learn as much as you can. But it's about having great people around you, I think. And there is a lot of work going on to retrain people and equip people with the skills in offshore wind. But I think a lot of it is just, if you've got so many skills are so transferable to offshore wind. So I think it's important to embrace the skills that you've got, apply for positions, network to get into the industry. So that was how I moved across to offshore wind.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing this experience. Definitely very interesting to learn about that. And maybe it would be a great example for others who would like to join offshore wind. Thank you very much, Christian.
Yeah, I feel a little bit like a newcomer next to Richard, but in fact I have a very similar history. Just a few years later, I came over also from conventional from the conventional energy industry, from gas in particular. And back then I just grabbed an opportunity which seemed to be a nice logical step into something that very much had a startup character at that time, 12 years ago, when 12, 13 years ago, when I was moving over to the renewables industry. And that was back then what grabbed my attention. Well, that's now obviously we've moved on quite a bit. We're not a startup industry anymore, which is fantastic. There's always pros and cons with a startup character, and for me now, working in the offshore industry just feels very rewarding, because you not only share a job, but you also share a passion with many people around you who actually share one value, which is making a change and having a purpose just beyond the 9-to-5 job that some other people might feel. And that's really what's so attractive for me, that there's something beyond the actual day-to-day activity that you perform in front of your computer or wherever it is. That's the part that's really that makes me enjoy actually most of my days ever since I joined this industry.
Sounds great. Thank you very much. Sounds very, very nice and lovely. And yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences. Now we know how both of you joined the field. So the next question would be, then, based on your experiences, which are vast, and your expertise, what's the biggest change you have seen in the past 5 years? What surprised you specifically during the 2022, of course, and maybe some interesting developments worldwide in either positive or not so positive way. I know that Christian, you already mentioned some global events that happen. So maybe you can say maybe which one is the most important or the most challenging. And yeah, that would be great. And maybe we can start with Christian this time and then Richard.
The biggest change I've seen in the last few years is the increased awareness of our industry and the importance of our industry for a greater goal, which is the climate change, the energy revolution. So when I joined 13 years ago, we were nothing more but as I said, little startup, a little stepchild of a big German utility, and this entire industry has moved on and has seen a massive shift in perception, because people are realizing and have been realizing over the years more and more how inevitably important the offshore wind industry is going to be for all the climate targets that have been formulated over the last 4 or 5 years. So now looking at the slide that I've shared with you earlier, it's sometimes I still think it's absolutely mind-blowing if I compare this to, well, Richard, only 4 or 5 years ago, right, when we've been praying for a next auction. Now we're facing, next year we're going to face 3-4 auctions in France alone, a couple of auctions in the Netherlands, and so on and so forth. So that shift is just impressive if you've been long enough with the industry.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Richard.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna sort of carry on with Christian's theme, because I think you're absolutely right, Christian. And it's the acceptance and just the development of offshore wind. So I reflected, it was only 2008 when I sort of joined the offshore wind industry, and it was, Christian used the phrase sort of a startup, and it was very much like that. We were developing the technology, and it was expensive back then. And there were some governments, like the UK government, I think, were very progressive. They recognised the potential benefits. They supported the industry. And as an industry, we worked together to really try to help convince governments and officials that offshore wind has a future. And we worked incredibly hard to really bring down that levelized cost of energy. I think back to some of my early projects. I think they were it was a ROC regime then, but we were sort of receiving somewhere in the order of £150 per megawatt hour. And if using the UK as an example, if you look at the last auction in the UK, it was the 4th allocation round in the UK, where contract for differences were awarded for things by up to 7 gigawatts of power. Was it £37.35, I think? So we've gone from £150 a megawatt hour to £37 a megawatt hour, which is incredible. So there is this massive global acceptance of our technology and our industry. That said, Christian's mentioned some of the pressures that we're under with the supply chain, war in Europe. We're seeing really high inflation, high interest rates, and so on. So actually prices are starting to go the wrong way again. That said, we're nowhere near the levels that we were back in 2008, 2010. So I think my reflection, sort of the biggest reflection, something I'm incredibly proud of, is having been part of this industry in those early days, and as an industry looking at what we've achieved, really from this much lower levelized cost of energy and just huge global acceptance of offshore wind. So we've given ourselves a huge challenge as an industry now, because everybody wants offshore wind. There are so many really impressive targets around the world, but what a great challenge to have. Much better that way than the other way. So I think, that's probably my biggest reflection.
Great, thank you very much, and it's very nice saying about the past. And now we talked about the past a bit. We heard your reflections, and I think it's a great time really to jump into the current situation. I think the next question really tied to your last comment. Um, what do you think the biggest opportunities in the offshore wind industry out there at the moment? So taking into consideration the events that happened in 2022, what do you think offshore wind role uh, could be in the current energy crisis and other geopolitical and price increase situation? So what do you intake on that? And then, of course, all of those substantial uncertainties that's correlated with the current war and crisis. So what do you think about that? Maybe Richard, if you go first this time, and then Christian.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're right. I think actually reflecting on last year, we've been coming out of the corona sort of situation. It's still there, but we've as an industry we've learned to live with that. The world has changed, as Christian mentioned. I think the war in Ukraine is a great example, and it really highlights the importance of the energy trilemma, and that's the absolute need to have clean, affordable, and secure power. And that's been a trilemma that the world's been trying to deal with for a long time. And I think right now more than ever, all three of those aspects are really important. So clean power is there's huge wide acceptance of climate change and the importance to decarbonize, to clean up what we're doing. And that pressure has probably never been greater. I think energy security, again, I don't think that's ever been quite as popular or as in people's minds as it has been. Again, we're seeing issues with gas supply, particularly where some countries are relying on gas from Russia and so on. So having secure power is really important. And affordability, we've in many countries across the globe, we are seeing a bit of an energy crisis. We're seeing extremely high prices for power, and it's a challenge for individuals, for families, for businesses. So the energy trilemma, I don't think has ever been more important. And I think offshore wind absolutely tackles all of those. It's renewable. There are no carbon emissions. There's sort of minimal carbon emissions in the production of the components. There's lots of great work going on to reduce those. So everything we do is more sustainable, but it's clean power. You're not relying on anybody when it comes to the fuel sources. It's the wind, and we know offshore wind, you get a nice, constant, steady, most of the time, wind resource, which is really good. And I've mentioned price as well. It's never been cheaper. So I think for me, the energy trilemma is, a huge issue today. It's going to be a huge issue in the next few years. I think offshore wind is positioned so well to really help manage that situation.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard, for explaining this energy trilemma. Christian?
Yes, and I mean, I can only subscribe to what Richard has been saying. This energy trilemma is the key challenge that we need to solve, and as a society, actually, in the next years to come. And just to highlight one of these three aspects, the affordability, because that nicely ties into what I've been saying earlier, ties into one of the key challenges. I mean, Richard, you said it, the incredible decrease of the prices of the LCOE from levels that we can't even imagine today to tiny prices in comparison. The question today is, has this race to the bottom be sustainable? Because what we see today is that energy might have become more affordable on the short run, but maybe at the cost of an entire supply chain. I mean, at least painting it a bit black here, but at least the supply chain has been massively struggling from exactly that aspiration to make energy affordable and to drive down the prices. So I think one key learning for me is that all these objectives, clean, affordable, secure energy, need to be pursued, but in a sustainable way, right? We need to, we can't be too extreme. We need to carefully, plan for these kind of developments, and we can't just, drive down the energy costs by 60, 70, 80% in a handful of years without causing serious harm to large parts of other parts of the industry, right? Which will then have a backwards effect that we're seeing now. Actually, LCOE is going up again because our suppliers are changing their paradigm. So that's for me one of the key learnings and challenges ahead. Very obvious in the question around affordable energy, but in general, how do we drive these changes in a sustainable way?
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you very much for this coverage and answering this question quite with some detail. Okay, next question would be, what are the common misconceptions people you deal with, maybe some politicians, stakeholders, or just ordinary people, have about the offshore wind industry? And how do you think we can combat those misconceptions and maybe communicate with the public more effectively regarding offshore wind? And maybe Christian, if you have a note, share experience in that, and then Richard.
Well, the perception has been improving massively in the public over the last years, both on the political side, but also in society. So whereas like 10 years ago, probably the concerns around the technology, around the potential consequences of certain aspects of this industry would have prevailed. Today, I think it's largely the other way around regarding public perception. However, there's still a lot of wrong or dangerous perceptions that we need to work around, and this is a lot to do around ecology, around impact of the nature around us, of the nature around the wind farms, about our impact on other related industries, such as the fishing industry. Is it really that we are causing such an adverse effect to the fishing industry around us, like many fisheries would claim in some instances? So there is still a lot of myths around us that I think we need to fight, and this is only possible by educating people constantly about what we're doing, what the real impacts are that we're doing of what we're doing, and therefore eliminating these remaining concerns.
Okay, Christian, thank you. Richard, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. I think again another great question. I think Christian, you hit on the main points there. I think it is about making sure that we are educating the general public and bringing them with you. So, there are all sorts of misconceptions out there. Christian mentioned fisheries. That's a really good example that actually most developers do work really closely with the fishing industry, which is really important. And studies have shown actually after an offshore wind farm has been constructed and settled down for a while, the marine life around the structures often increases, and they get more fish into the area, different types of fish and so on, and it actually has a positive impact on sort of fishes and the general ecology. But of course, a lot of those messages don't go out there. There's often sort of statements made which are misinformed, aren't necessarily true. Local newspapers might pick up on those. So it is that important sort of role of educating people, but also being aware of any potential downsides. And again, most developers do exactly that. They're incredibly careful when designing and developing offshore wind farms to take the nature and the environment into consideration and make sure everything's being done to minimize any negative impact on the environment, maximize positive impacts. So I think it is really trying to get those messages across, and I think they tend to be the misconceptions. The other one that you can often read about in newspapers is, offshore wind is unreliable. And doesn't work. Well, it's not unreliable, and it does work. What it is, your level of generation is dependent upon how much wind there is, and that is predictable. So offshore wind won't be the only source of energy. You need a balanced system. So when the wind isn't blowing quite so strongly, there's other technologies to fill the gap and to give us a nice balance. And that's where being integrated, I think, really helps. So BP had done a lot of work on hydrogen, for example. I know that other companies are as well. But I think actually, green hydrogen production, clean hydrogen production, and that balance with offshore wind, again, is a really nice integrated solution to that. And it's not reliability, but that sort of consistency and having a fully integrated energy system. So I think a lot of it is education of the general public and beating some of these misconceptions.
Great, thank you very much. And one way, just listen to this webinar and dealing with the misconceptions and then improving from here. Okay, great. Thank you very much, both of you, for answers. The next question is more specific, is about floating offshore wind technology. And we received quite a few questions, and I would just summarize as one question, since we don't have time to deal with every question. It's pretty much, what's the current status of offshore wind? And some people are asking, is floating offshore wind maybe struggling to achieve its current projected growth, given the challenges Christian has outlined in his presentation? So maybe we start with Richard this time, and then Christian.
Yeah, thank you. I think, offshore wind, floating offshore wind, I think is going to be an important technology in the future. So we've talked about the journey of fixed bottom offshore wind and the cost reduction that we've seen and the learnings and everything there. Floating needs to go through a similar journey. So there's lots of demonstrator sites out there. And there's a lot more variability. So there's all sorts of different potential floating structures, the substructure that can be used. And it's great. There's lots of those being trialed, being demonstrated. So again, as an industry, we can try and work out which technologies may or may not work best in different environments. And that's really important. And we are really still at that demonstrator pilot type phase. There's been a few auctions recently to lease out large areas of seabed so we can start moving to commercial scale floating offshore wind. I mean, in the UK, we've seen that in Scotland. A good number of the ScotWind projects are in deep water and therefore will be floating. So there's a number of markets where floating offshore wind needs to be the solution. The sea goes very deep, very quickly, or as we're seeing in many countries, the seabed is really quite congested. So the need to go that further offshore into the deeper waters is going to play a key role, I think, in the energy strategy. but we are at a fairly early stage. I think there's huge potential to industrialize the process. So offshore wind, floating offshore wind is fairly expensive today because it's one-off. They're demonstrators, they're pilots, and by their very nature, they're going to be quite expensive. But when you're building a gigawatt scale farm, then we will get the industrialization, we will get those learnings, and also great opportunity to get even more local content, which I think is going to be really important. So personally, I think floating offshore wind is going to play an important role in the energy mix, and I believe the costs will come down as we learn more, we industrialize more, and at some point, hopefully they'll be on parity, fixed bottom floating, but that's going to take a while, and we've got to be patient, and we've got to go through that journey before we get to that point.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. Christian, your view on
Yeah,
floating?
not much to add there, to be honest. Richard is touching on all the relevant points here. I think there's no way around floating offshore wind. It will happen. It will happen because there's no alternative in many places, as you say, Richard, either due to congestion or other conditions. So it will come, and we will see. We are seeing actually right now the first scale projects. We will see Brittany South auction coming up in France. We'll actually see before that the California lease bed auction just now in the upcoming few days. So scale will be there, and therefore we will see much sooner than we might have anticipated this shift to industrialization that you outlined, Richard. So it's not a question of the if or when. It will come. It will come in the next few years. We can already see now the groundwork being laid with the auctions that are about to be held, and we will see hence a very similar development of the floating industry as we've seen in the fixed bottom industry.
Okay, great. Thank you very much both for covering the floating offshore wind type of questions. And the next one, which is also quite interesting, is about hydrogen to offshore. We as WFO, just last month, we began a new committee, hydrogen to offshore, and it's a very exciting opportunity to discuss those matters and work in the field. So, and as for you, both, what can you share regarding the hydrogen to offshore and its development? Maybe what kind of future do you foresee, maybe like the biggest challenges, opportunities? And maybe this time we start with Christian and then Richard.
As with many new technologies or industries, and we discussed a similar topic just now for floating, we see a cost issue with for the capex issue for the hydrolyzers. Costs are still very, very high. That's the big challenge that you can see in every new technology, in every new industrial development. But with the currently discussed incentives, and also in light of the let's say global political trends that we've been highlighting a bit earlier, I am very optimistic about the hydrogen growth globally, and especially for Europe. This is a big play. Also for other in Europe, mainly for reasons of security of supply as well. In other places, this is also just an inevitable alternative offtake structure wherever we find other means of offtake more challenging, wherever we find grid conditions more challenging. So it will play a role in the overall energy mix for sure.
Okay, thank you very much, Christian. Richard?
Yeah, I agree. I think again, Christian, you've hit on some great points there, which I agree with. I think hydrogen is going to play a really important role in this energy transition. Yeah, there are some industries which are going to be very difficult to decarbonize and particularly to electrify. So those sort of industries that rely on your very high temperatures, glass, aluminium, sort of type facilities, and also the heavy transport, so shipping and maybe lorries and those large sort of industries which aren't necessarily going to be used in sort of batteries and electrification. So I think hydrogen's got a really important role to play in the energy transition. There's lots of research going on. I know BP see hydrogen as a key pillar to our energy transition and the transition of our company. So we're carrying out lots and lots of research, lots of work in demonstrator schemes, pilot schemes, and so on, because I think it's going to play a really important role. Of course, you get all the different rainbow spectrum colours of hydrogen today. Obviously, as an industry, we want to be all moving towards the cleaner colours, and I think that's where offshore wind comes into play. So offshore wind, as Christian said, great offtake opportunity for offshore wind, helps manage security of supply, help manage peaks and troughs in demand potentially. So I think there's a huge benefit in offshore wind and other renewable sources coupled with hydrogen. So yeah, I think it's going to be a key part of the energy mix going forward.
Wonderful. Thank you very much both again for sharing some lights on hydrogen development. It's a very nice discussion and it's great learning from you. Unfortunately, the time is, as always, with the Christmas, it's again Christmas time. I just remember the last one and it's a new one again, so time flies. So I think, unfortunately, we don't have time for additional questions. We have quite a few. However, we're going to continue the discussion. And as for now, I just would like to thank you both, Christian and Richard, for your time today, for sharing your views. And now we know definitely more how to get into the industry for those who are still not. And it would be great for the audience if you join us during our next webinar that's going to be happening in February 2023, on February 22nd is to be exact. And as for now, I wish you a wonderful holiday season and enjoy time with your family, significant others. And and join us for the further events such as webinars. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.